Hey everyone, Jeff here with the Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream and JFree906 Podcast. And I am today, we are in, where are we at? Chester?
We're in the village of Chester, Nova Scotia. Yes.
Nova Scotia. And I have the honor to be here with Mr. Danny Hennigar. Danny has created this room, and we're only seeing just a small portion of it at the moment. But this room is dedicated as a display for Oak Island, correct?
Oak Island, pretty much the chronological story of Oak Island from 1795 onwards up. Well, not really present days. My room is kind of small, so I can't make a lot of extensions to it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I tell you what, there is so much, and I'm hoping at some point I'm going to take a lot of pictures for everybody. And I am going, yes, Mr. Oak Island, that's right. I'm going to take a lot of pictures, and I'm going to send them to put them out on our Facebook group page so you guys can see them. But honestly, even on the walls here, everywhere you look, there is memorabilia of Oak Island here. And right over there is the replica of the 90-foot stone. What I would like to do, because I don't know how many people are familiar with Danny and also his museum that he has here dedicated. This is a train station.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a train station left over from the Halifax Yarmouth Railway, and that stopped completely back in the 1980s, I believe it was. And then we being the Chester Municipal Heritage Society, is able to purchase this building.
Oh, okay.
And we've turned it into many things over the years. And currently we house a lovely Oak Island display and a wonderful gift shop. So if you come to Nova Scotia, you've got to come in our gift shop. That's imperative. And you got to come on our display, which is free. So you don't have to pay anything to come in. But we have a donations box, so feel free.
Yeah, this is really neat. And this building is quite unique. I don't know. Is it pretty much the way it was back in the day when?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, some of the walls here, the room that we're in now used to be a baggage place.
Okay.
And you could come here and get the parcels that were shipped from Halifax or Yarmouth or Boston or across Canada. And there's actually marks in the wall. You can see dents where people were not as careful with luggage as they should be. But always very authentic building. And most recently, we picked up a caboose to go along.
Oh, the one I saw outside here. Okay.
Great big plans to turn this into a train station or a train museum in time. This is going to stay here at least for a while, so don't worry. It'll be here for you when you come, unless you become very, very old. And it may not be. We'll see.
Well, it was really neat, and I know I had directions to get here. This is the first time I've actually been in here, and we were in a bit of a rush. I know we were running late here today to get started, but
all my fault.
No. But really, it was very easy to find. I think it's 20 Station. What's
20
it?
Smith Road.
Yeah, 20
off the
Smith
number
Road.
3 Highway, Village of Chester.
Pretty
easy to find, actually.
Yeah, really cool. We are going to be taking some questions because, of course, we didn't get a big chance to set this all up ahead of time. So we will be taking questions from those of you in the chat as we go along today. Linda's here with us. She's helping, as she always does, and I appreciate that very, very much from Linda. As we go along, and like I said earlier, somebody had referred to Danny as Mr. Oak Island. Now, that's what he was called by Carmen Legg. Carmen got a hold of me on last Monday, a week ago Monday, and said, "How would you like to go meet Mr. Oak Island?" And I said, "Who's that?" He goes, "I'm not telling."
That's a lofty perch to fall off. I'll tell you right now.
So he brought me over to your house. And we got an opportunity to sit for a couple of hours, Christina and I, and of course, Carmen sitting across the coffee table from us there. And, basically we got that opportunity to really sit and listen to everything you had, these stories that you have. And that's what I thought, we have to share this with everyone. So we were kind of rushing around to get this all set up for everyone. So we didn't get a chance to put out a lot of questions. But what I would like to start off with, Danny, if you would, is to let me know, you were a tour guide for Oak Island back before the Laginas were even involved.
Way before the Laginas, way before. I started off in 1973 as a summer job. I was still in high school. So, I took a fat little kid from high school and plunked him in the middle of a tourist attraction as opposed to talk to people from all over the world, and I did. I learned to do it after a while.
Mhm.
Public speaking is something that scares the pants off of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it scared the tar out of me,
Mhm.
but I got used to it. And I discovered after a while it's not that big of a deal to talk to people, particularly when they're interested in something
Exactly.
like Oak Island.
Yeah. Yeah. Truly, the Oak Island story is really
Oh, it's
one.
huge.
How did you, as you were growing up, and again, I'll watch for questions here. Oh, Danny, speak a little louder. Okay.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Let me turn him up a little, actually. I was going to say, it sounds like it's raining.
Oh,
All right.
yeah, lots and lots of rain.
Okay. Is that better for Danny? Do a little test there and see.
Can you hear me now?
All right.
Better?
We'll see if that works a little bit better. Hi all. Yeah. Makeshift studio. Eh?
Very much so.
Yeah, it is. I just ran in here with all this equipment and started setting it up. And Danny told me, don't break my display case. There's several of them in here. And this is really cool. I have to show this. All these things. Who made this here?
Well, that diorama was built by a local artist.
Oh,
We
really?
actually built two of them. One is in
Uh-huh.
their local government office, a municipality's office, and of course we have this one on the wall here. But what it shows is an aerial view of Oak Island,
Mhm.
especially for people who've never been to Oak Island. You can see what it looks like from the air. Mind you, with the internet, you can find all the aerial photographs you'd ever want. But we created this. It's a kind of fun and playful, and there's some things on that that'll make you ask questions too. That's a fun
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's neat. And there are some quite a few different things in here. But okay, let's go back to that. As you were growing up,
Mhm.
had you heard stories at that time? Obviously,
Oh,
if you were
gosh,
coming
yeah.
out, tell us a little bit about that whole.
Oh, well, you can't live in this part of Nova Scotia without hearing some of the folklore. Of course,
Mhm.
Oak Island has always been part of the folklore here.
Right.
My grandfather worked on Oak Island with Gilbert Hedden back in the late
Wow.
1930s.
Wow.
Granddad was a hard rock miner, so he was hired by Hedden along with other men to drive tunnels and shafts and that sort of thing. So there was that. And my other grandfather, on the paternal side, he was sawyer, a miller of wood, and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Although I don't know if anybody bought lumber from him, but it'd be hard for me to believe that lumber wasn't sold from his business to Oak Island. So there's that old connection going way back. But I remember the first time I was ever on Oak Island, I was maybe 4, 5, 6 years old, and we
Wow.
landed on the beach in a speedboat. Dad said, "Son, be careful running up over the hill. There's holes." And all I could hear was Dad saying, "Run." I ran up over the hill, and I'll be darned, to look around, you could see holes. It was a kind of a dangerous place back
Wow.
then, so you had to be a little careful.
Yeah.
And then I was not on Oak Island again until probably 1973, and I got my job.
Okay.
I got to tell you, it was the best job I ever had.
Really?
The absolute worst pay, the best job I ever had. I love being the tour guide.
Now, who hired you for that?
Well, it was the provincial government, and my supervisor, her name's Linda Maslin, the late Linda Maslin. She has since passed away. A lovely woman, very nice person, and she's part of who gave me the confidence to talk to people and to give tours of Oak Island
Mhm.
and to research too. It wasn't very good if you came to Oak Island and walked up to a tour guide and you asked him a question. He said, the first year there's a lot of that.
Oh, I'll
you
bet. I'll
started
bet there
reading
was,
the
yeah.
books, and I wasn't going to go back in 1974 and work on Oak Island without knowing a little something about it. And that
Mhm.
just really lit the flame. And
Mhm.
I've been doing research ever since. I sort of backed off doing research, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, I guess, because they have professional researchers on Oak Island, and they're very good researchers, very dogged and determined. They found a lot of information. So often what I do when I get a tidbit, I'll pass it along to them. So I know the show would like to have it. I know
Mhm.
they would like to have it. I know all the partners would like to have it. And when I speak about partners, I'm talking about them, Tester and Laginas
Right.
and their other partners. So I always make sure that information flows to them. Although every now and then I'll keep a little something and I'll just chew onto it all by myself, sort of thing. So so that's
Nobody else ever did that. Dan never did that, or Fred, or
well, sometimes really odd fellows. I knew Dan a lot better than I knew Fred, although I certainly knew Fred. Last time I talked to Fred was in 2009, but I talked to Dan a lot and traveled with Dan, actually. Dan and I went to a conference in Toronto one time together. He was invited to speak there as a guest speaker about
Mhm.
Oak Island, and I came along to help him out because he was in his 80s at that time and a little I would never call Dan frail to his face because he slapped you up the side of the head down the other side. But Dan wanted some company, and I was more than happy to go with him.
Right.
And we traveled into a treasure conference in Halifax one time together. I really enjoyed that because I got to meet treasure hunters.
Oh, wow.
Other than the guys in Oak Island, so I got to meet people who actually found treasures, mostly off of Cape Breton and in the waters out there. There's actually a lot of treasure up there still.
Really?
Yes, there is. Find it. There's
Finding it.
In Nova Scotia right now.
Oh my gosh.
Find it belongs to the government. So
I seen a couple of questions pop up already. One was from Jan. She was asking, were they actually doing any mining on Oak Island? You talked about, your father being involved in mining. So was there actually mining going on, or was it all just treasure hunting?
100% treasure hunting.
Okay.
To my knowledge, and I've done a lot of research on Oak Island, there's never been any mining per se. There's no mineralization on Oak Island worth any commercial venture, even 200 or 300 or 400 years ago. There's never been anything here that we've seen yet that's worth looking for.
Mhm.
So my grandfather would have been just hired as a miner because he had the knowledge. His big thing was drilling. He knew how to drill really well.
Yeah.
To set charges to blast, not this type of drilling. His would have been lateral drilling to set charges into.
Mhm.
Of course, he was used to working the hard rocks.
You're right.
Jan, does that give you any answer at all?
Probably. Yeah, it should. And that, because a lot of people have speculated over the years, because of Gold River, dumping right there into the bay.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people have said, well, there's gold in Gold River, and a lot was taken out of it. So maybe they were just mining for gold, and that's all it was. There was really never any treasure ever there.
Oh, I've heard that suggestion many times, that there's mines in Oak Island. And I've heard the suggestion also that the money pit was a well for water. And, people would understand, of course, you have to have fresh water to supply your ships.
Right.
But I always completely dismiss the idea of there being a water well in the money pit, because there's lots and lots of rivers and lakes close by with pristine water into it. So you wouldn't have to go through all that trouble to dig a well.
Right. That makes good sense. Yeah, absolutely. So you started working as a tour guide, and that was, and I mentioned this to you the other night when we met, that doing the tours, I always, I didn't understand how Dan, I always thought Dan was a kind of a man who wouldn't want people on the island. He wanted to keep his secret to himself, but he was really involved in public, letting the public know at least some of what was going on.
When the provincial department of tourism stopped doing the tours in the 70s, Dan took over, and he didn't do the tours, but he had guides hired that did the tours, so they kept on with it. And then in later history, when we started a thing called the Oak Island Tourism Society, Dan was pretty much involved. I have to give him full credit. Dan didn't shy away from the idea of there being a tourism project in Oak Island, and Dan and I both agreed that Oak Island could be one of the top 5 tourism attractions in Nova Scotia.
Oh, yeah.
I think it'd be the top attraction, but that's just one guy's opinion. But anyway,
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think so too, with the interest in this island. And so Dan was involved, but Dan also too, he liked to play his cards close to his chest, close to his vest, so he would he wouldn't tell you everything. One of Dan's sayings was, "Don't tell him everything at once." That's a smart guy.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
Absolutely.
I'd sit there and talk to Dan for hours about the different things on the island, and he would tell me something, and I'd say, "Geez, Dan, I never heard that before." And he said, "Well, it's because I don't tell you everything." Well, smart guy. I have a lot of respect for Dan Blanchard. I have respect for all the treasure hunters, every one of them. Doesn't matter what they've done in the past or whatever. They had the fortitude and the guts to come out here and do it. And for a lot of guys, they had to sail over to Oak Island. There's no such a thing as driving across the causeway.
Right.
So
yeah, that was built later on.
Yeah, sure
one of the questions from Maya there is, when did Charles Barkhouse get involved in doing the tours? Was that about the time that you were there? Or?
No, Charles came a little later on, but Charles worked at the Oak Island Resort, and he did presentations there for various tourist groups, and that's how he became more acquainted with it. And Charles has family that had been involved with Oak Island, and got to know the treasure hunters that way. He knew Fred Nolan better than I did. But I think at the time I knew Dan better than Charles did. So between the two of us, we had pretty good knowledge of two of the main characters.
Wow. Because that's most people that talk about the fact that when they've gone on tours, they've had Doug or Charles Barkhouse or someone like that actually conduct the tour.
Yes.
So I was kind of curious about when that came evolved. Linda, there was a question from John too. I kind of missed that one. I don't remember exactly what it said there. I know you're going to have to scroll back. So what does Danny feel is buried on on Oak Island?
That's a dandy question. I get asked that a lot. Here's my standard answer. I'm not convinced that there's a treasure buried underneath of Oak Island, mainly because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any treasure. I've seen lots of interesting artifacts and whatever have you. But I am convinced, very convinced, that somebody was underneath of Oak Island and on Oak Island prior to popular European contact here in Nova Scotia.
Wow.
And that's prior to 1604, because the French were here in 1604. So I think there was somebody here prior to 1604. And I'm not so darn sure if there hasn't been more than one group here over the years. That's the best I can do for you.
Why did Fred sell to Robert Young?
I really don't know. I couldn't speculate the reasons why Fred decided to sell a piece of property that he worked so very hard for to get, and paid a lot of money for lawyers and wherever have you. But nonetheless, he did sell lot 5 to Robert, and he sold another lot to a family friend by the name of Johnson. So there was a time that the furthest lot over this way and furthest lot over this way were sold to other individuals. But Laginas and company have taken those lots over, so they own a lot more of the island than they did before. So
yeah, Jan's asking another question there. Was Dan Hennigar part of the tour team also?
Tour team?
Yeah, was he ever part of the tours or anything like that?
Dan wouldn't shy away from talking to visitors when they came along. Once we tour guides were finished with the group, Dan might take over, and they'd ask Dan questions about borehole 10X or where's the money put, where's the treasure and stuff like that. And I can hear Dan's voice in my inner ear talking to people in his tone. Dan is a really interesting guy, very intelligent man, and he liked talking to people. Yeah, he enjoyed that.
Yeah, well, I know that he's played a big role in things that have been going on later.
Oh gosh,
you know, with the Laginas and that too.
He's one of the few old-time treasure hunters left.
Yeah,
I mean, David Blankenship, Dan Hennigar.
Yeah,
these guys are the treasure hunters that are left over.
Yeah,
and, they're falling off quick.
I know. Unfortunately, that's true because all that knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, and we just found out later about all the file cabinets that I believe it was Doug, if I remember right, had gone through in the basement of Dave's house or Dan's house.
Dan's house, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
way back in the 2000s, as I said before, I was with a group called the Oak Island Tourism Society, and we had been in Dan's basement where his office was, and his house at one time is much smaller than it is now, and it was just jammed full of filing cabinets and artifacts and whatever have you. And the people I was working with, they said, you know, really, all this stuff should be cataloged and digitally copied. So we convinced Dan to let us copy all of his files. Problem being, we think we were finished, and Dan said, "Oh, I found another cardboard box over behind the furnace," and we do that. And he said, "Oh, I just happened to find one on the shelf back here." So I know we didn't get everything. I absolutely know that. And of course, I looked over everything.
wow.
Oh, everything is put on CDs. We had 5 CDs in the package, and we had a secret person who helped us put money towards that. The province helped us with it, although we didn't give them a copy of the CDs by Dan's suggestion.
Okay.
And all of the CDs had to be returned upon the end of the Oak Island Tourism Society. That ended in 2009, so we had to give all those CDs back. But I read them. I read every single one of them.
Wow.
All of them.
And that's
Dan
why
knew that. This is no surprise. No surprise to him. He was happy with that.
Right. And that's why, you know, you're referred to as Mr. Oak Island, because of all the knowledge that you have up there. And that's why I'm really honored folks. I'm really, truly honored to have you on the show here today, because
I'm honored that you chose to have me on your show, because there's a lot of high talent that you're that you're interviewing.
No. No, but that's the point. I've always said, and I'll say it again, that always wanted the podcast to be fun and entertaining, and we all might learn something in the process.
Me too.
And well, yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, you're still learning, but I mean that's why hearing these stories that you're telling and everything is so important to me. This is the top question. Look at this one right here, and I've seen somebody else asked it too. To you, what is the most important find that has happened to date on Oak Island?
Oh, gee,
Can you even go there? I mean,
pressure there. Jeez.
you can,
All of them.
all of them. You know what? And they all tell a story.
Geez, I don't know. Every one that they found indicates something new, something different.
Mhm.
Take the lead cross, for example. Finding that lead cross, it showed that somebody left a lead cross on that island that has connections to Templar areas in Europe. The inscribed stone, or the 90-foot stone, the warning stone, which obviously
I'm
we've
glad you brought
lost.
that up. Yeah.
It's gone, but to me that was an important find. And yes, I believe that actually existed. So
Okay, that's where I was headed.
I'm going to say all of them, because I can't pick one in particular. I think that's the one.
Mhm.
But I got to stop for a second. I got to say, listen, hello to all of you Oak Island fans out there. I want to say hello to one guy in particular. Say hello to my buddy Tim Povey. I know Tim's watching. If he's not watching now, he's watching tonight. So, right on, man.
All right.
So you want to talk about
Is that the person you told me about earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
he's
right.
very,
Good.
very keen in Oak Island. One of the biggest regrets I had is that I was never able to take him on Oak Island when he came here. And he's not the only one. I've had lots of guys over the years, gals too, that I could not take to Oak Island because of the ownership issues or insurance issues or political issues. Because Oak Island is like a deep river; it runs deep with politics.
Oh, I bet.
It's just
I
the
bet
way
it
it's
does.
a treasure hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now here's a question I have to ask, because, and I'm going to say before I ask this question to you that I wish that the TV show would not talk about the curse. You know, this whole thing. Do you believe in that whole curse thing, or is that something made up? Where did that come from?
One of the researchers did some work on that, and he feels that it came from I think it was a magazine article in the 1930s where somebody said there's a curse of Oak Island. But the curse, as I understand it, goes like this: when all the original oaks are gone and 7 have died, the treasure will be found. Now, I asked Dan Blankenship with that one day. I said, Dan, what do you think of the curse? Because I figured there's a man who's almost died in Oak Island a dozen times.
Oh my gosh, I know.
So he looked at me and he said, "Oh, bullshit." That's exactly what he said. Sorry if the swearing bothers anybody, but that's
But you had to put it the way he did. Yeah.
That's what he said, bullshit. So
Yeah.
I thought, okay, fine. I don't particularly believe in it.
Yeah, I don't either.
A lot of people do, and good for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't either. Now, speaking of the curse that I don't believe in and all of that, and I will get to your question, Robot, in just a moment. Let me go to this one first. There has been many tragedies on the
Yeah,
island.
there sure has been.
One of the stories that you shared with me and Christina when we were at your house the other night was about the Restalls.
Oh, but
Would you
Cyril
mind?
Hiltz, perhaps?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And you were
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about the young
sad,
man
sad
that was
story.
involved in it. Could you tell us a
Cyril-
little bit about
Yeah, I
that?
sure can. Cyril Hiltz was one of the laborers hired on Oak Island to work in 1965.
Mhm.
He's only 16 years old. And even at 16 years old, he had already served time on one of our scallop draggers out of Lunenburg or Riverport. And for those who don't know the scallop dragger, it's just a great big ship that goes out way the heck out in the ocean and will bring back scallops. So he tried that. He told his friend, he said, look, his friend asked him, said, Cyril, how come he didn't come back? Because they made good money, really good money. Cyril said, I don't want to go to sea anymore as I'm terrified of drowning at sea. And my God, Cyril drowned in a 27-foot deep hole on Oak Island. That's how he died. He actually drowned.
Here's somebody who was afraid of drowning and why he gave up being out on the sea.
Yeah. So he
And
would
then
drown.
ended up drowning on
Drowning
land.
On land, basically, yeah. It's so sad. And he had a girlfriend. His girlfriend was pregnant at the time, and I know the young lady who became an adult woman, very nice person, and so his legacy lives on. She's well aware of what happened to her dad. So,
Mhm.
interesting story.
Wow.
Very interesting story.
So the Restalls, when that whole thing happened, and you talked a little bit about how they were overcome. Could you kind of go through that a little bit
The
too?
story as I remember it, and I'm sure some people may take exception to this, but the story that I'm going to tell, it was August the 17th, 1965, that they had a gang of men working on Oak Island, burning brush and whatever have you. Robert had a 27-foot deep hole down the Smith's Cove that he was working on. He's actually pumping it out. But he and Mildred, his wife, were in their shed up, or their house, whatever you want to call it, very small house, up on top of the hill close to where Borehole 10X is today on the island. And they were preparing to go to Chester for the day, because at that time there was no causeway. So to get to Chester, you had to get in a speedboat and go down to Chester, find a place to dock your boat, go into town, do your chores, come back out. So he said to Mildred, look, I'm just going to run down over the hill for a few minutes, checking the men, checking the pump. I'll be right back up. That's the last she ever saw him.
Wow.
And what happened was, the best that I'm able to piece it together, is that he went down to where the pump was and was leaning over the hole looking in and tumbled into the hole. The suggestion that I have heard from people, talking to Dan Blankenship, who was here at the time, he wasn't there for the tragedy, but he was in the area at the time. There's a thing called an air inversion. Now, an air inversion is when smoke comes out of a chimney, instead of going up, it falls back down to the land. When you see that, it's called an air inversion. So it keeps gases closer to the ground.
Right.
And carbon monoxide from the pump is what I think made him dizzy and fall into the hole. However, once they get in the hole, there is another gas there.
H2S.
H2S, that's right.
Hydrogen sulfide.
Hydrogen sulfide, that's right. Because witnesses who had been in the hole and come out of the hole talk about there being an observable layer of gas there. And when the people came out of the hole, they absolutely stunk like rotten eggs. In
And there
fact,
you go.
one guy, Jim Kaiser, who was a bit of a hero in this whole thing, he went back down the hole to basically recover the bodies. And when he came out, he smelled so bad of that his wife washed his coveralls, washed them, couldn't get the stink out. They eventually threw them away.
Wow.
And poor Jim, he spent a lot of time having very difficult times about that.
I can only imagine.
But when these guys all fell to the bottom of the hole, because each guy would go down and try and rescue the fellow that fell down ahead of him or went down the ladder. And at one time, I think there were 7 guys down the bottom of the hole, and only 3 of them made it alive. Barely.
Wow.
Just barely made it in the hole. There was a fireman from New York there at the time who helped with the rescue as well. And his story that he wrote about it is a lot of us researchers have a copy of it that speaks to his time there on the island and that whole business. It's quite a story, and it affected everybody around this area, because we just didn't have that type of tragedies happening here, especially something in Oak Island where some people thought it was a bit of a folly. Some people thought it was quite serious, but to have 4 guys die and have a father and a son die together, it was a real tragedy.
It was.
Any loss of life is a tragedy, but that was especially
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thunderstorm.
Thunderstorm moving
Thunderstorm coming in.
Hope we don't lose power, folks. We'll try to keep this going. All right. So I did see Robot's question go by, and I was going to answer it for him, or try to get an answer for him. I know Linda's scrambling now to find it, because I don't remember what it said. But we'll try to do our best here with that and get that question for you. But anyone else, there it is there. Have you ever experienced any, paranormal activity on the island?
Me personally, no. And I think because I look for it. I'm one of those guys who'll go into a haunted house at midnight looking for a ghost, and the ghost never appears to me. So maybe that's the reason. But yes, Oak Island. In fact, I heard a very recent story about a cameraman from the Curse of Oak Island who saw a paranormal experience in the same area that the only experience I ever had with paranormal happened as well. There's a center road that runs right down the middle of Oak Island. And from there, it splits into a Y.
That would be this road here coming in?
That's correct, center road.
And then it splits?
Okay. That one that you're putting your finger on right now, that's called the beach road. Goes down to the beach.
Okay.
And down in that area there, many people have had some sort of experience in there. I'm not gonna say it's nonsense. I'm not gonna say I believe it. But people are absolutely adamant about the things that they experience. So what happened one day, When I was a tour guide, what they do, they station us tour guides at different locations around the island. And the idea being tourists would walk up to us, we give them our spiel, answer any questions, direct them down the road to where to go next. So my friend Danny and I just had another Danny there. We're sitting on the picnic tables late in the afternoon, like 4 or 5 o'clock. So we're waiting for the last guy to come off the island. And we saw him coming up the road, and he was doing a quick march up the road. He was just a bath of sweat.
Wow.
And we said, are you okay? He said, you wouldn't believe what I just experienced. He said, well, what's that? He said, there's a spot down there on that road that you can stand. One side of you is hot, one side of you is freezing cold.
Wow.
And he said, I could step in and out of it. Cold, hot, cold, hot.
Wow.
And he said, then all of a sudden I started getting this really odd feeling, and he just beat it up the road. So I still see him walking down the center road. He just disappeared. He was just a quick step in it. And they tell me when he got to the parking lot, he spun his tires and took off.
Wow.
That anxious to get there.
That was it.
So, of course, Danny and I, we jumped off the picnic table and we ran down to see if we could see anything. Absolutely nothing.
Didn't feel anything.
Years later, in the same spot while I was giving a tour, I was walking with a lady. She's a school teacher. And she said, oh, my son, I'm so cold. And it was a miserable hot day. It was just awful. Heavy humidity and everything else.
Wow. It's close.
So she said she was just cold. And she was kind of a big lady. And I thought, oh, my God, I hope you don't have a heart attack. So eventually I asked her, said, do you mind if I put my hand on your arm to feel your arm? And I put my hand on her arm, and it was ice. I couldn't believe it. I never felt anything like that before. Like I say, it was a hot day, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my face and down my back. And I thought, why are you so cold? But she experienced that in pretty much the same place that this guy is telling you the story about. So
wow.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Strange things on this earth.
Yeah. Before we get to the Laginas, and I do want to talk about, he's got a very interesting picture behind him that you can't see in the camera, but we'll show it.
That's a Davey picture.
Yeah, and if we get to, it's also in Scott Clark's book.
Yes, Scott's picture.
Yeah, it's Scott's picture, but it's a great one. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on Mr. Samuel Ball.
Okay.
Can you kind of take us through what you know of Samuel Ball? Because so many people, I included, have wanted to research him to find out, and I've done some research on him to find out. And of course, the idea was that he was, he was granted a lot, but he ended up buying a lot before he was granted. And he was a cabbage farmer. Take us through that a little bit. What do you think?
Well, it's been suggested he's one of the wealthiest men in Nova Scotia, and I'll go back to take a word from Dan Blankenship on that one. I'll say bullshit.
Okay.
We all know the story of Samuel Ball. He was a slave in the Carolinas who got his freedom by fighting for the British against you folks. Sorry, but
yep, I know.
Little tiff we had there. We're over it now.
Yeah, we're over it now. It's all good. We're friends now. Yeah.
So anyway, he fought for the British, and the British said, "Look, you come up to Nova Scotia, and we'll give you land." All black people who fought for the British at that time were told the same thing, and of course, it wasn't true. Some of the land was given, but it was really poor land, especially around Shelburne. And my understanding is that he came to Shelburne, lived there for 2 years, then left Shelburne, came here to the village of Chester, and lived here for 23 years.
Wow.
And as a blacksmith. And I'll tell you how I can't say that I know this. I suspect strongly he was a blacksmith because a man presented himself one day at a festival that we used to have called Explore Oak Island Days. And he said that he was a direct descendant of Samuel Ball. And he said, Did you know that he was a blacksmith? I said, no, I didn't know that.
Wow.
So apparently more family members had approached the people on Oak Island while they're doing the show and say he's also a cabbage farmer, which makes perfect sense. You're not going to make all of your living on Oak Island blacksmithing, but a really popular, good trade to have. And you're certainly not going to make all your living off of cabbage farming because you'd have to have, enormous amount of land to grow cabbage on because you need a lot of cabbage to make sauerkraut, which is the big thing, although you certainly can eat cabbage in other ways. I think Samuel Ball was just a good, hard-working man who did get some land from the British. They did give him some land. I've seen the land grant application from him. And I think he just worked hard and was happy to be a free man. And upon his death, white people on Oak Island were the executors of his will. And I think that shows that there was a good relationship, a good
Yeah.
friendship there.
Yep.
So I think he died in Oak Island, a very happy man. Nobody wants to die, but
Right,
when
exactly.
your time comes, it comes. And I just
Exactly.
think he was just a happy man, and I think he was a successful man.
Mhm.
And I think he proved that the bonds of servitude don't have to be attached to you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't think he found any treasure
No,
of
I
any
don't.
type?
No,
Okay,
I don't.
interesting.
There's absolutely no evidence of it. No,
Right.
credible evidence.
Mhm.
No, I got to preface that by saying I was a law enforcement officer for 33 years. I've been told a lot of lies over the years, and I like to have verifiable facts.
Yeah.
People can tell me a story, and I'll repeat it, but I'll repeat it with "we think"
Mhm.
or "allegedly so" or language of that effect, sort of thing. I haven't seen any real evidence that indicates to me that he was a treasure hunter or that he found a lot of treasure in Oak Island. Maybe he did. I
Right.
don't know, but I
Yeah.
think he just worked hard.
Yeah, I was because that was one of the things that I was always a little confused on, and I think I mentioned this at your house that there was two papers that were put out way back when. It said the three, and again, it's one of those things where I wish the TV show wouldn't say, they talk about the three boys, young boys going out and finding the how they got over to the island or whatever when they were actually men.
Mhm.
But the three names on it, if I go to this correctly, was McGinnis, of course,
Donald Daniel McGinnis,
and then Smith and
John
Ball.
Smith, and Samuel Ball was
Right.
mentioned in one
Right.
story that
Yes.
I read the same as you have.
Mhm.
Personally, I think it was just a writer's mistake.
Okay.
I
Because
really
later
do.
on, it became Smith, Vaughn, and McGinnis.
McGinnis, yeah,
Right.
on.
Okay. So you think that's more the case, and the other
I
one was
do.
just okay. All right.
Until
Yeah.
somebody comes up with some really good
Yeah.
evidence, then I'll change my story 100%.
Okay.
Until then, no, stick with my story.
Yeah, and I'm going with you on that. So there was another question that popped up here. There it is. There is there any natural gold deposits in Oak Island or under it that you know of?
I've seen a core sample that was taken out of the slate. That type of rock, I shouldn't refer to it as slate. There's a proper word, geological word for that material. And Oak Island is underlain by two different rock structures. One is anhydrate on the eastern,
Which
end
is
of
what
the
they refer to as the bedrock, right? Is that
yeah, bedrock,
okay?
right on.
Mhm.
And on the other side, and this all happens in the middle of the swamp. In the swamp, the slate, I'll call it slate, dips under, anhydrate comes and meets
Oh, wow.
it. And that's all part of the Windsor Rock Formation that runs right through Nova Scotia and disappears out to sea somewhere.
Oh, wow.
There's actually an island out here that has sinkholes onto it because of the underlying
Oh, wow.
anhydrate. But in slate, those associated types of rocks in this part of the world is where you will find gold, but you got to have other minerals there, like quartz, for example. Quartz, seeing quartz and
Right.
slate together, sometimes you'll find gold. I have seen a core sample at the public archives in Halifax that suggested that there's little tiny bits of gold into it. To me, it's not commercial amounts of gold, and you're not going to dig a shaft down that deep in the ground to take out gold if it's not going to pay you.
Right. Oh,
You're
absolutely.
you're going to have some money. And our gold here, you have to force it out of the rock. It's not like you see the gold shows on TV that come out of
Right.
Yukon or Alaska where
Mhm.
people talk about being able to pan for gold. You can pan for gold here, but it's gold that's already been loosened out. Or it's really, really, really fine flour gold.
Mhm.
But you don't find nuggets here without smashing rocks.
Okay.
It's
So
very difficult to do.
that enterprise right there makes it so much more difficult to get anything that chances are
Oh, yeah.
nobody was mining for gold on Oak Island.
I personally, I don't believe so. I'd be shocked if anybody ever found actual evidence that there's a gold mine in Oak Island. I'd say, man, you lost your shirt. There's no
Mhm.
gold here.
Somebody, and I'm not sure who this is. I don't have the Facebook, unfortunately, being remote here. It says there is some wood in one of the cases in the train museum, which looks similar to parts from the wood drains discovered by Dunfield. Anything known about these pieces of wood? And thanks for doing this, Mr. Oak Island.
Gee whiz, I'm gonna have to live with that, aren't I? We have wood here that was first seen in the 1930s. I think it was by Hedden. Logs coming out of the sand in Smith's Cove. And then later in the 70s, it was all dug out and I found a U-shaped log structure.
Yep.
So I'm thinking that's what you're talking about, the U-shaped log structure. And yes, we do have samples of that here. what we have is we have a sample of the big log that was laying on the ground, and then a piece of the upright that would have been in an angle like this, and we have a 2-inch wooden dowel made of oak that would have held it all together. And that's what I think you're referring to, because I don't have any other wood here that would be considered a drain per se.
Oh, is that it right there?
Right there, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's right in front of us.
yeah, right in front of you.
That I've got all my
Exactly.
stuff sitting on top of that. He was telling me, don't break that cabinet.
Don't break that cabinet.
But yeah, there's a big piece right there. And that dowel pin. Yeah.
Yeah, 2-inch
Oak
dowel
peg.
pin.
Yeah, it's
Made of
right
oak.
there. Oh, folks, I tell you what, if you have, when you come here in this area to go see Oak Island or whatever else you're doing, you have to come in here. I mean,
Oh, you have to.
this is incredible.
The Nova Scotia police will put you in jail if you don't come in. I'm telling you, you gotta watch them. You gotta watch them. I'm only teasing.
Yo, that's really, really interesting. So, let's say, interesting. I said, does he know where the blue clay is mined on Oak Island, or is it come from somewhere else?
Personally, I think it's in situ. I think it was blue clay that was found in the ground, naturally left over by the glaciers. And Nova Scotia was torn apart by glacial action 18,000 years ago, and that's why we have such a rocky coastline here. If you go across the spine of Nova Scotia to the Bay of Fundy, a different rock structure out there completely, and not as many rocks in the ground as you find here. You won't go down 2 feet here with a shovel, you'll hit a
Oh,
rock.
I know.
And it
They're
could be
everywhere.
this big around or as big around as a car. They're huge rocks. It's all left over from the last
Right.
glacier.
And they got pushed here. That's something Carmen was telling me also. So you go up by the Bay of Fundy, there's not very many at all. They kind of
No.
seem like they got shoved down this
That's
way.
right. That's right.
That's
And you
very
can
interesting.
actually, if you know what island to go to, there's an island out here in the bay, not too far from Oak Island, 2 or 3 miles, that has deposits of what used to be mud, and in that mud there's fossils left over from when the glaciers pushed it
Oh,
down
wow.
over Nova Scotia.
Wow.
My cousin found them. My cousin Ashley Lonas found that.
Really?
And, he turned it on to me. I have never saw a thing like that before in my life.
Wow.
And I thought I'd seen a lot on these islands out here.
Oh, you have that here in the museum somewhere?
No, I don't. It's about this big.
Oh,
around,
okay.
So it's not moving.
Well, speaking of stones, you do have one. It's right over
Yeah.
there by the door
Sure do.
when you come in. And again, I'll get some pictures for you folks on this stuff. It is a replica of the 90-foot stone. And then also there's a over on the wall over there. There is a somebody created this. It's like it shows every level of every 10-foot level. As we know, they were digging down. They every 10 feet they would find
the
a
money
layer of in the money pit. They would find a layer of wood logs or wood, and they would pull them up and keep digging. And it shows what was found all the way down, and then of course the 90-foot stone. Do you believe in the 90-foot stone?
I believe the 90-foot stone existed.
Mhm.
Whether the characters that you see on TV or in the books are what was on the stone, I'm doubtful about that. The story goes that was put down on paper after somebody had looked at the stone from their memory. I can't speak for you, but I know for me, if I looked at 3 or 4 lines of symbols and tried to reproduce them all, I'd get past the first 2 or 3, then I'd have a mess on my hands. So unless you have a photographic memory,
which I don't. Yeah.
no, me neither. I think what you see in the magazines and the books and whatever have you, I think it's a good representation and possibly might have been there, but it's so simple. It's a simple substitution cipher. And I don't know. It speaks about the British, and I don't know. But I think the stone actually existed. It's recorded in local history here by Judge Miles Desbrizet, who wrote a book called The History of Lunenburg County. And he speaks about witnesses who had actually gone out to see the stone when it was in the fireplace in John Smith's home.
Right. I heard about that. Yeah.
And
I
when
wondered
the
if that
stone-
was true, actually, if it was in the fireplace.
well, you know, and that's always in the background. You always wonder, is that true or not? Excuse me, but I personally have read enough about it. And Judge Desbrizet is a pretty reputable fellow when he was alive, and he wrote a pretty good story about the history of Lunenburg County. I believe it existed. And if somebody can prove it didn't, I'm more than willing to change my tune.
Well, how can you prove it didn't? That's the thing.
Well,
you know?
there's the thing, you know.
It's hard to prove that it did. And we got so excited when we saw them go over to the book
I
bindery.
wanted that to be the stone so bad. I
Me
wanted
too.
it to be the stone so bad. It's still a nice, sexy stone. I got to say, I was looking at it just about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, really? That one
Right.
that they found?
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's going to be in the well, it's in the museum right now, although it's not a museum at the moment. It's sort of been changed to something else.
Lab. Yeah.
I looked it over, and there is some initials onto it, but the dimensions don't seem about right to me. And I'd love to say it is, but I'm going to wait till the jury comes back in and gives us a verdict.
All right. Sounds good. I tell you what, that's one of those little pieces of the Oak Island story that I want so much to be true.
Oh,
And
me
I
too.
wish we knew what it said on it,
Oh, absolutely.
because then that might be the key to this whole thing. Sherry asked the question, have the Mi'kmaq ever been spoken to about the history of Oak Island?
They haven't been spoken to about the history, but they have spoken of the history of Oak Island. Here's a story that a researcher, a former friend of mine, found. It's in a book called The Birch Bark Tales, and they called it that because the author included a little piece of birch bark that would go in and act as to put in your book to hold your place in the book. But anyways, a story in there, and the story goes like this. Back in the day, and we're talking an awfully long time ago, probably the 1500s, I would guess, maybe, 1500s. A couple of native guys were chasing a bear along the shore, and the bear jumped in the water, swam over to this island. So they camped on the shore overnight, and they figured, look, the next day we'll just go over and get our bear, boom, just like that, no problem. So they went over to the island, which turned out to be Oak Island in time, because it wasn't called Oak Island then. Because Oak Island's gone through at least 3 or 4 different names over the years. Of course, back in their time, it wouldn't have had a name unless they named it.
Right, unless they
Of course,
did.
that's not recorded now, because we're not very good at recording those sorts of things. But anyway, the story goes that they crept through the bushes, tracking this bear, and finally their attention got waylaid by something completely different. They could hear voices. And they went to this clearing, and they could see some dark-skinned men performing some sort of a ceremony over an open hole, and that they filled the hole in. And when they left, the native guys went back, and these dark-skinned men, sailed away in a ship. And when the native guys went back, they found a piece of hawser rope. Now, all a hawser is just a great big piece of rope that you might use for tying a ship up to it.
Okay.
So that went back to their encampment. Many years later, the story goes that a missionary was into their encampment trying to save the native people from themselves, and they didn't need any saving. But anyway, he saw this hawser rope on the outside of this man's structure, and he said, "What's this all about?" And the native guy, who was very old at that time, told him the story.
Oh, wow.
So that's the only story that I'm aware of our Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia talking about Oak Island. But I also know the Mi'kmaq people have stories that they have yet to tell us white people. So maybe someday they'll tell more stories. I don't know.
Interesting.
I hope they do.
Yeah, because then you go back to the whole story of Sinclair. There's been.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? I mean, we talked a little bit ago, and I know I'm asking you to really put yourself out there to talk about this, but
the Sinclair family absolutely believes that the Henry Sinclair landed in Shuttabucto Bay in 1349, I think, or 1309. I can't remember the date. It was definitely in 1300s. And they've erected a cairn there and a plaque, and speaks about them landing and interacting with the native people. I've spoken to native people at the Shubenacadie, or the Power Center in Truro. They have a really nice museum there, an interpretive center. And I spoke to one of the guides one day about that story. He says, "Look, the native people know that Glooscap wasn't Henry Sinclair. He was one of their gods." And they sort of snicker a little bit when us white people talk about Henry Sinclair being Glooscap and all those associated stories. Quite frankly, I don't know where the story really lies in there, because everybody's going to have their interpretation. I tend to defer to what our Mi'kmaq brothers and sisters say, because I think they have stories that, again, haven't been told to us, because I don't think they think we're ready for them yet. So,
maybe not.
yeah, maybe not exactly.
It might not be.
But that story persists. And what a lot of people think is that Henry Sinclair came here, interacted with the native peoples. They were very impressed with him because he came in on the back of a whale or a sailing ship. And that he was, they loved him. They thought he was a great guy. This is how the story goes. And there is a suggestion that there was babies made between that coupling. And I know the Sinclair family back in the 2000s had been doing a DNA project to try and prove that, to
Oh,
see if there's a
wow.
relationship between the Sinclairs and the Mi'kmaq people.
Hmm.
And I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Wow.
I got the stinking suspicion it probably didn't pan out for them.
Ah, okay.
I hope it did.
Yeah.
I hope somebody proves me wrong on that one too.
Makes a great story, though.
Sure
and,
does.
and again, you want to talk about that, or we have talked a little bit about that pre-Columbian contact
Oh,
with
yeah.
Europeans in North America. So, and I'm a believer that, well, I know that Columbus did not discover America. So,
No. The Vikings did. They were here in the year 1000 in Lanza Meadows up in Newfoundland, Labrador. I visited that site, and it's pretty sure that they were here. Whether they are down here any further, the jury is still out on that one. But I
Yeah.
know there's people looking at it. They're looking at that aspect of it. And I know that there is suggestion that the Vikings had been down into America, certainly down along the eastern seaboard, and
Yep.
left behind some tantalizing clues
Yep.
that people interpret as being Viking in origin. And
Mhm.
we have some very interesting story.
yeah.
Very interesting story.
Yeah. And we need to find more evidence of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Renee's got a question here. Now, this kind of takes us back to when you started getting on the island and doing your tours and things of that nature. Renee's asking about the stone circle. I think that's the lot 5
Lot
stones.
5, yeah.
And some other structures, and the wall that's probably, is that lot 20? Which lot? Is that 28 where the well is?
Oh, that'd be Samuel Ball's.
Right.
Yeah.
So, when talking about that a little bit, what do you think about some of these structures? Now, I know, I don't want to get you into a spot where, you might touch on something that you shouldn't be talking about.
Oh, don't you worry. I've signed my non-disclosure agreement, and I'm thinking about it right now.
That's what I don't want to go there. If we don't want to go there, then please don't.
Well, I'll tell you what. You watch the television show, and I'm hoping you'll see some photographs that the Chester Municipal Heritage Society owns, and we've leased it to the production. And I'm kind of hoping you see them in this production. And I know that there was structures there. Well, I don't know. I'm pretty certain that there were structures on that part of the island, but I don't know for sure.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that stone circle is left over from like a home or a barn or something like that. I simply don't know.
Mhm.
But I'm willing to bet you before the end of the season of a television show,
We'll have an answer. Yeah.
I think you will.
What do you think about, going over to Ball's property and that well? Ian Spooner, who I'm going to have on the show tonight. Ian, I think Stephen, just for those of you who've been waiting for that show tonight, I got a little message from Stephen today, Steve Guptill, that he's not feeling well. So he may not be there tonight. He's trying to find a replacement for himself to come on with me. And we're going to be over at the Oak Island Resort tonight. Ian Spooner, and I plan on asking him a little bit more about the well. Now, if they're going to continue any investigation on that this year, of course, he won't be able to tell us. But he did find that piece of wood, a little tiny piece of wood they found when he did sample down the bottom of that well, and it came back dating about 900 years ago. I mean, who would have built a well there? I mean,
farmers on the island had to have water for
Exactly.
themselves. They
Yep.
had to have water for the cattle.
Mhm.
I've seen this well, and I'm questioning why is it so close to that second swamp?
I know.
don't really understand that.
Yeah.
I would think the water would be brackish. I didn't go over and taste it.
Right.
Anything I should have when I was there, sort of thing, but I didn't. Personally, I'm suggesting, just my own personal opinion, that's just a well he dug to maybe for his family or his cattle.
Mhm.
I don't know if he had cattle, but I can't imagine man living on an island like that, not having a cow,
Oh, yeah.
not having a couple of pigs, and
Right.
chickens, and you got to have water for them.
Exactly. Yep.
And as far as
Especially if you're a
something-
cabbage farmer.
Oh, exactly. You have to have the water.
Yep.
And as far as finding something really old in the well, it's so close to the ocean. That ocean blows a lot of stuff out of the ocean, off the shore, up onto the land. So it's hard to say, was that when the well was dug, or did something fall into the well? That whole shoreline there faces the open ocean.
Yeah.
And I've been on 9.
From what it looks like on television, it certainly does. I mean, it looks
Oh,
like the
gosh,
ocean, then you got that little pond or
Yep.
swampy area,
Yep.
and then the well's right there.
Yep,
It doesn't,
exactly.
from what we see on TV, it looks like it's all pretty much about the same level.
And what did it look like back in Samuel Ball's time? Was
Right.
there more land there? We
Right.
know that the ocean is rising.
Right.
We know that the island is eroding.
Mhm.
So at what rate sort of thing did the two meet back
Mhm.
in his time that
Right.
maybe he thought, well, this is a great place to dig a well. And today we're thinking, what do you dig a well here for?
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah. And then, of course, you got the wall that's right there. And that wall, again, from the TV show that we saw this last season 10, seems to be wider with like larger stones on the outside, kind of leaning in, sort of like this, and then cobble and whatnot filled into the middle. It seems like an awfully well built and big wall for, I mean, wide. When I say big, I mean wide.
Oh, yeah.
To build a boundary wall. I don't know. I mean, any thoughts on that? I'm sure
well,
you've seen it.
Oh, I've seen it. I'd love to tell you more about it, but I can't.
Okay,
because
all
I
right.
wear an old NDA.
No
But
problem.
I'll say this about boundary walls. They're very common here in Nova Scotia.
Yep.
So farmers would choose a piece of land. They're going to build a field now, whether to grow crops like hay or
Mhm.
cabbages or corn or whatever they're going to grow. And with our land so rocky, when you bring up a rock, well, you got to put it somewhere. So you might as well put it on your boundary wall.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
it keeps your cattle, because cattle won't walk up over the top of that and down the other side.
Right.
They're a little stunned sometimes.
Mhm. Sheep will jump over it, but yeah,
Oh,
cows
but,
will not.
That's
Yeah.
why you tie sheep or put it in the pen or eat it.
Yeah, yeah.
There's always that.
Yep.
But I don't think there's anything particularly unusual with those
Okay.
walls other than boundary walls, but we'll wait and see.
All right. Sounds
Season's
good.
not over with yet.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Tom Burns has shown us pictures. He's gone out and shown us pictures around Nova Scotia and New Brunswick of walls that are very similar. So who knows? We'll see what that comes of that.
When I drive around, I look for these sorts of things as I'm driving. I look for old cemeteries. I look for rock walls in the woods and that sort of thing. They're common,
Yeah.
especially on this coast.
Yeah. Yep. Do you know where the lead cross was found? And it was in disturbed beach, or could it have been washed ashore? And if that's possible, is there a ship record treasure of? Is there a ship record treasure off?
Ship recorded.
Oh, ship. Yeah, ship. Yeah, like a recorded of a treasure off of Smith's Cove in the water.
I'm going to open up a can of beans here.
Way to go, Ray.
Yeah, way to go, Ray. Yeah, so it's not impossible that could have been dropped by somebody. It's not impossible that could have been in situ from when the originators were on the island, fell into somebody's pocket, or
Mhm.
I don't know why you'd ever leave a cross like that behind, but why you'd leave it, I don't know.
Mhm.
But off the eastern end of Oak Island, and if we were able to move around this display, I could show you, there is a shipwreck. Oh, in fact, it's right behind you. If you could point
Oh, let me get out of
that
the way.
little thing right down there.
Oh, right here.
Right there.
Okay.
There's a shipwreck.
Oh,
Now
that's off of like lot 30-ish, right around in here. So
Ish, yep, there,
yeah.
ish. That's not exactly because when the artist did it, I know she had the map, but did she get it exactly where it was supposed to be? It doesn't
yeah,
really matter.
it doesn't matter.
But there's another chart on the wall shows exactly where it is. And how I know it's a shipwreck. In 1995, there's a German film documentary company here called, they produced a show called Der Flitsch der Oak Island. And that means the curse of Oak Island.
Oh, wow.
Back in 1995.
Really?
Yeah, and they hired an oceanographic institute here in Nova Scotia, the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, to do a bathymetry study of the eastern end of Oak Island. And they found a shipwreck along with other anomalies that just shouldn't be there. Now, for example, you see where those lines.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you
Yeah.
right here off of this would be the south. Well, here's Smith's the South Shore Cove, and then this would be the Money Pit,
Money
10X
Pit,
right up in
that's
here,
right,
of course.
yeah.
And then right here are, and I've seen these on some of the pictures when Ian Spooner was showing us about the water levels and things like that. You can see these two ridges. It says Boulder Ridges right here on this map, on this picture.
What I was told by one of the two scientists who had created this map that we're talking about, they told me when islands erode, the erosion lines follow the contours of the island. So the island will erode along with its contours.
Yep.
When you see something that goes 90 degrees out from the shore, that's man-made. Unless it's a rock shelf, bedrock that sticks up, but that's not bedrock.
Wow.
So the suggestion is but those could be spoils from underground that the originators took out there and dumped. Now, that's just a big old supposition.
Yep.
No proof of that, and I have no idea if Lagunas have explored that or not. Same as the shipwreck. Now, that shipwreck, I asked Gordon Fader, one of the two scientists, I said, Gordon, could that be like a little lobster boat that somebody scuttled just to get rid of it? It was done its time. So sure, it was over 100 feet long. So this shipwreck out here is over 100 feet long. And then I made a fateful mistake. I asked him, I said, are you sure it's a shipwreck? He stiffened right up and he looked at me and said, Mr. Hennigar, I can assure you, I've seen hundreds of shipwrecks on the bottom, and that is a shipwreck.
Wow.
So, back off.
So you got your point. Yeah.
I got told in a very nice way. A nice fellow, I have to say.
Wow.
Nice guy. So there's a shipwreck out there. And boy, would I love to see them do some work on that to see what it is.
Well, we know that the Lagunas have had Tony Sampson go out and dive, which would have been right out this area out here, looking at the Samuel Ball. You see, there's 2 points you'll see on the island when you're looking at it from a Google Maps or whatever, and you see 2 little ridges that stick out in the water where there was wharfs that went out there, and there was a gentleman that was around the island back years and years and years ago that took him out in the boat, and he was showing him where these were, and then Tony dove on them and found that there was Samuel Ball may have had these two wharfs that went out there in the water, or reused them that were there. So we know there's definitely some sort of stuff that was in the water out off the, from years ago, washed away. All the cribbing is gone now and whatnot. The rocks, they used to fill them in, but
wharves do disappear. There's no question about that.
Oh yeah, I've seen people talk about the ice heaving them up and destroying them around here.
If you have a lot of ice coming out of the bay, that ice has enough pressure to tear wharves apart. And of course, the storms that we get, oh God, it'll destroy a wharf in no time flat. And that's happened on many islands, many parts of the shoreline along here. The place is loaded with the
debris
from torn up wharves and whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit to the Laguna time frame.
Okay.
Talking about this picture, and I'm going to show this real quick just because I have to show you guys this. You've seen this probably in the thank you. You guys have probably seen this in the if you've read Scott Clark's book or anything, but I'm just going to peek over here just briefly and show right there. There's that picture. Is that hard attached to the wall? Yes, it is. Okay, yeah, all right. We won't mess with it then. Yeah. It's a picture of the Lagunas, Rick and Marty, riding in an old, like Willie's military Jeep.
Military Jeep, yeah. I was doing a tour, and no vehicles were allowed on Oak Island. That was verboten. We were told by Tobias and Blankenship, no vehicles on the island except unless you guys have to deliver something. So I heard this vehicle coming, and at that time, if somebody's late getting to a tour, Garnett or David Blankenship might drive them down, catch up the tour. So I thought, oh, somebody's late for the tour.
Right.
And I saw this Jeep coming. I thought, oh yeah, all these guys hanging off the Jeep, and they pulled up in front of us. And it was Rick and Marty. I think they're another partner there that you never see on TV. I won't mention his name for 2 reasons. I don't want to embarrass him. The second reason is I always stumble over his last name, so I'm not going to murder the man's name anymore. Yeah, they showed up, and I knew who they were because I'd already met them, I think, earlier in the day or maybe the day before. And they were drinking some of David's wine, which was potent wine, I'll tell you. And so that's the first time basically that I saw them on Oak Island.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool. And Scott took that picture, which is
Scott Clark, yeah. I saw when we were at your house, you had his book sitting on you.
Yeah, Scott's a good friend of mine. And he's mentioned my name a few times in the books. I helped to get him on Oak Island so he had a tour.
Right.
Scott was on every tour.
Yeah, he mentions that. Yeah.
Great. I even said to him at one point, Scott, you should think about becoming the tour guide because he's so knowledgeable and a nice guy and wonderful family too. Nice family. But so that's it's not the first time I met the Lagunas, but certainly that weekend.
Right.
That's when I met them.
We're
sorry about that.
He'll try to hold it up a little higher.
I'll try to hold it a little higher.
And so you're looking on the, on the walls here, there's so much old history, folks. I mean, honestly,
Enormous.
there's pictures like right here behind the monitor. There's a picture of, looks like the Dunfield. It's
Yes.
Dunfield standing down in the pit,
Yes.
in the money pit with the bucket of the crane coming down
Oh, yeah.
beside him.
Just a huge excavation.
Yeah.
Huge.
There's just so much in here, folks. You got to come and check this place out. You really do.
You have to come.
Let's see, one more question. Oh, this is Ray again. Ray's got a lot of questions.
He
right?
does. He does.
Yeah, one more
Curious
question.
man.
Let's see. Was Oak Island originally 900 or 1200 years ago a peninsula? Oh, okay. Going back to the
Not an
water
island.
levels.
do
Was
I
it
think
once
it's-
a peninsula and not an island? What do you think about that there's a ship in the swamp? Two questions
Oh,
there he's
gee
throwing
whizzes.
out.
I have no doubt in my mind that there's debris in the swamp that may have washed in there from
hmm
other places.
Other shipwrecks?
Maybe, yeah,
Mhm.
possibly. I'm loath to believe that in the recent memory, in the past 4 or 5 or 600 years ago, that Oak Island was 2 islands. I don't believe that. I know Ian Spooner would probably slap me upside the head because I think he's already said that sort of thing or words to that effect. But
Mhm.
he and I have never sat down and discussed this, so I'm just going off of what I understand.
Mhm.
I personally don't believe there's a shipwreck buried underneath of that swamp. I really don't. I really hope we prove wrong. I surely do.
Right. And I know Jack and I talked about that. Jack Campbell, who was co-hosting with me some time ago. We did the first couple seasons together when I started doing this. And we kind of wanted, especially when they did the seismic survey, and then they came back with their data, and it looked like there was a ship-shape anomaly in the swamp.
Oh,
And
yeah.
right off the bat, there's a schooner in there. And then of course the stories. Now, again, with all the shipwrecks, folks, and I got to tell you, going out in this bay, out here, all around these islands, and I'm pointing this way. I don't know which way the islands are.
Actually not.
That way, okay. With all these islands that are, but there are, to navigate a large vessel from the ocean all the way through and get around here with the shoals and everything else that's around here would have been a very hard task to get a boat
You
in
want
here.
to be a seaman.
Yeah.
You want to be a sailor. You want to know how to do it. And these guys knew. We've often had big ships in this bay. That's not particularly unusual for here.
Right.
Maybe these days because there's no commercial shipping here anymore. It's mostly pleasure boating.
Mhm.
But back in the day, we had great big German steamships coming in to pick up pulp, and they used to turn their ships around out by Oak Island and back them right into the estuary of Gold River.
Oh,
To
wow.
load them with pulpwood. We've had ships explode out here in the bay. The most famous one being the Young Teaser, which was an American privateer vessel that blew up not that far from Oak Island. And I often wondered if some of the debris that they're finding in the swamp that they're identifying as being from an old ship, if it could be parts of the Young Teaser.
Mhm.
And this is not the only ship that's ever sunk in the bay or had damage done in the bay, sort of thing. And as you point out, there's a lot of islands here and there's a lot of shoal water. You have to know where you're going in order to navigate it.
Mhm.
But Oak Island, once you get in, even around the back of Oak Island, you've got a pretty safe place to stash a ship. Pretty safe. And
Yep.
you've got at least 2 escape routes. You can sail across the bay, get out behind Hancock Island and escape, or you can go right directly out to the ocean from Oak Island. So,
Mhm.
and there's deep water there.
Yep. Wow. Okay. So, hang on a second. Somebody's actually trying to. Okay. Going back to the Laginas real quick. Now, since they have taken over,
Mhm.
how do you feel about what they're doing and how they're going about this treasure search? You've seen the whole thing with Dan and Fred
Yep.
and
Sure
the things,
did.
and you know the history going back much farther than that. How do you feel about what they're doing and going forward? Do you think that they will? Let's do that part first, and then do you think that they will be successful in this endeavor?
I hope they are.
Oh,
I
me
don't want
too.
to close my eyes for the last time and not know what Oak Island was all about. I'd love for them to discover it. I'm highly impressed with the amount of scientific work they're doing along in conjunction with the
Mhm.
stories that are being
Yeah.
told. Really super pleased about that. Super pleased they have archaeologists on site And right now there's a team of 7 archaeologists out there, and I'm stoked about that. I'm thinking anything gets found, we'll know exactly what it is. Sometimes production and archaeologists and those guys' stories differ a little bit, and that's just the way it is. They have to make an entertaining story.
Yes.
I understand that, but I think Laginas I think they're doing a great job. They really do.
Yeah.
People have mentioned to me about the destruction that they've done to the island. If you look back over time, most treasure hunters been in there. They've torn the island up pretty bad.
Worse
So
in many ways. The
So
dynamite.
I'm not-
Dynamiting the HO
dynamite.
stone.
Good
I mean,
Lord.
I'm like, no, of all things.
yeah, and
Think of the messages that might have been on there for us.
I
That we,
was on Oak Island when Dan and David hooked up charges down in 10X and blew it
Mm,
down to 10X. And I'm not sure it was at the very, very bottom or just up from the bottom a little bit. I have it home in my notes somewhere. But, you can't dig in the ground without destroying things. That's all there is to it.
yeah.
And I have to say, the current regime, they're replanting trees and doing things like that. And I know that there is an attempt to make it look nice once they're finished with
Mhm.
it, sort of thing. So I'm quite pleased about that.
Good.
I'll be madder than a hornet if somebody starts building houses on Oak Island.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
be
I don't want to
madder.
see that
I'll
happen.
throw
I
myself
do.
in front of a bulldozer. if they start doing that.
Let me know if you do it.
I'm telling you.
I'll come up here and we'll
You
stand
come
in front of
up
that
here, that's right.
causeway.
I'll tell you, you lay in front of me and I'll lay on the other side of the bulldozer. When I hear you squeal, I might run.
I agree with you on that. I hope that this is preserved for many, many years into the future as a place for people to come. And speaking of which, knowing that you were a tour guide back then, would you say no if they asked you to be a tour guide again someday?
I'd be the guy at the front of the line. But they're going to have to pay me.
You're not going to do it for free anymore.
We'll talk. No, I think someday you're going to see a tourism project.
Yeah.
I really do. It's too popular for people to not be allowed to get onto it. And I feel bad for those who drive across Causeway and are told, please leave. I really feel bad for them. But I understand the reasons being production can't have people yakking and talking while they're in the museum trying to do some film work and that sort of business. So I understand that.
Mhm.
And you got to do this first and then tourism later, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I hope it comes back.
Well, we know that they're well, and we've been told that the building where the interpretive center is, as we know, it's been added on to. The assumption is that it's going to be the interpretive center will become the museum again, or
Yes,
interpretive center,
that's what I've
and
heard.
then the lab and all that kind of stuff will be in this new section that's being built. That's the assumption that we're making on that. And we're also assuming that it's going to be open sometime, hopefully by next year, so people can come out and see it again.
I hope so.
So at least if they could open it up and open up the parking lot there for people to come over and see that and see the monument
Oh yeah, that's really important to people.
and actually step foot on the island,
Step foot on Oak Island.
because that's such a draw. I mean, even myself, for me alone to be able to actually step foot on the island. I mean, you think about that, how many of us want to do that and be able to come, turn around, park there, go inside the interpretive center, see the things that they have found, that they have on display. And then if you don't get a tour just yet, maybe someday.
I'm looking forward to the day and I can take you on a tour and show you the McGinnis Foundation,
Oh,
the Hall property.
I would love
the
that.
Center Road, the Smith's Cove, Isaac's Point, all these points of interest. I love showing people that stuff because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting.
The Nolan's Cross. What do you think about
Nolan's
that?
Cross. I think it's a big, big structure. And it's hard for me to believe that it's not been done on purpose because of the way it lines up. I haven't done the survey onto it, so I'm going off what other people have said about it. And I think there's something to Nolan's Cross. But I'm not going to go on to limb and say just what.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that I've said many times on the show, and people have heard me say it before, that nobody's going to go through all that trouble to move those giant boulders into place
It's a lot of work.
just to simply say, okay, we did that. Now what are we going to do?
There's
It
another,
has to mean something.
it has to. It has to. I totally agree with you. It's the same as the drilled stones that were on Oak Island, the 2 triangles of stones that were on Oak Island.
Mhm.
I think all these things. There is a book that Dan Blankenship told me about, and I'll tell your viewers about it too. It's called De Re Metallica. It was written back in the end of the 15th century by Georgius Agricola. And in his book, he talks about ancient mining techniques. So this is a guy back in the late 1400s
Talking about
mining.
ancient.
Yeah. So apparently it wasn't uncommon to lay out on top of the ground what you would do underground once you got there. It wasn't uncommon to do that.
Oh.
And back at that time, in the ancient times, they had the ability to dewater mines. They had the ability to remove big rocks. And I know how they did it by reading the book. And they could ventilate it and they could dig deep. There's no problem for them to do it. Now, I'm suggesting they probably use slave labor, so it's probably a bit of a problem for the slaves, but they could do it. They were absolutely able to do it. At that
Interesting that you said what they would lay out on top of the ground, what's under the ground.
Yep.
Wow. Could there be some sort of and we've seen when they went over, and I can't remember for the life of me where this was, but we've seen last season when they went over across the pond and they were looking at those tunnels, one of them being laid out exactly like the lead cross underground, with the head tilted. Yes, when they went over to Europe. Yeah. And they saw those tunnels under there. Now you're making me think, possibly could there be any kind of a tunnel that's shaped like the Nolan's Cross underground?
As the narrator says, could it be?
Could it be?
Could it be? Maybe. Maybe not.
Kat says, I recall reading about finding a skeleton hand in the money pit in the museum that Fred ran. Is that true?
Okay. Story about the hand is back in 1971, I think it was, when they drilled borehole 10X, they enlarged it from a 6-inch hole, so a hole about like this, to 27 inches in diameter, which would be about like this. When they lowered the TV camera down into it and turned it on, they could see a very blurry image of what appeared to be a human hand severed at the wrist, gently flowing in the water. Dan Hennigar will tell you they think they bumped it with the camera and it went off screen, possibly went back down to the bottom again and stayed there. But what the suggestion to me was that in the drilling, they drilled through a body, severed the hand off of it, and it became floating sort of thing until they bumped it with the camera and at a range it went. So that's, I think, what you're talking about when you're talking about the human hand, because that's the only thing I know about with regard to being a human hand in Oak Island. Was it a human hand? We simply don't know. There's no recording made of that particular incident.
Oh, man.
No recording made.
Wow.
Subsequent trips, yes, but not that particular one.
Right. Now we've got the bones under the ground. I mean, we're going to start wrapping this up. So if anybody else has any questions, put them up so we can get to those too. But the bones that were found when they were doing like H8 and C1, I don't remember which one they actually came up out of, but supposedly there was 2 pieces of bone found. One was European, one was supposed to be Middle Eastern.
Middle Eastern, yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, again,
excellent story. I wish I could see them in my hand. I wish I could talk to an expert, somebody with proper education to explain it to me. I really love to hear the story about it. I remember when that came out on TV, I thought it was, wow, that's a really nice find. It's a heck of a find. My family doctor at the time, I went into his office one day and he said, "What do you think about Oak Island, Danny?" I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "I'm not surprised they found a bone down there. We never really get into it because then I had to interrupt him with my medical problems at the time."
You're right.
He was kind of skeptical, and I thought to myself, I wish I would let him talk more about that, like why he thinks it's not surprising that there would be a bone found down there. Because to our knowledge, everybody who died in Oak Island has been removed.
Right.
The bodies have all
Right.
been
There's
removed.
no graves there.
Well, there are graves in Oak Island.
Oh, there are.
Oh, there are. Yes, sir, there are. I know this talking to firsthand witnesses who had seen the graves on Oak Island, on the western shore of Oak Island. I've explored that part of Oak Island a lot myself, and I've yet to see any evidence of graves. But there was a man I talked to who said, "Yep, there's graves there."
Wow. Yeah, it looks like somebody, and I don't have a name on this. It just says Facebook user, but it says, "I heard a story that a cemetery that was discovered on the island while building the causeway."
I never heard anything about that. I'm not saying it isn't so, but it's not a story that's ever come to my eyes.
Right.
But like I say, I was talking to a man one day. Actually, I was in the cemetery looking at Cyril Hiltz's grave. He and his dad are both buried there. And some of the McGinnises are buried in this graveyard too. James McGinnis, for example. And so I saw this old fellow come out of his house. So I went over to talk to him because I love talking to old fellows. They got stories to tell.
You betcha.
And I said, "You ever been on Oak Island?" "Oh, gee, yes, sir. We've been there a lot. When we were young fellows, we used to go up there and used to take the family out there and have picnics." And I said, "Have you ever seen any graves?" "Oh, yeah." I said, "There's some graves out there." Described generally where it was. And that was on the western side of the island. So I'm perfectly willing to believe that Samuel Ball is buried there.
Oh, really?
Yep,
Wow.
I think he's buried there. I think there's some McGinnis graves out there.
Wow.
There is a stone on the island that some of us believe may be a McGinnis's tombstone because of the letters that are onto it and dates and that sort of thing. Partial dates, partial letters. No way of knowing for sure. Simply no way of knowing. But I think that I think he's buried there.
Wow.
All of us researchers search every graveyard within a 20-mile circle of Oak Island, and the only one we can find is John Smith, and he's buried right here in Chester, the
Wow.
Baptist Cemetery.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
he's got a tombstone too. So
Yeah, well,
see
there you
his
go.
name,
Yeah.
John Smith. There
Yeah.
it is. And
Wow.
it is the John Smith, not some other guy named John Smith. There's a million John Smiths.
Yeah,
This is
pretty
the
common name,
John
you think,
Smith
yeah.
came up from Boston. That says
Wow.
right on his tombstone.
Man, oh man, there you go. I mean, there's been a lot of people have asked about graves on Oak Island, and I never heard of any that were there. So I'm really glad you shared that.
Well, that's what I was told. I
Right.
didn't see it with my own eyes.
Right.
So I know that that's what a firsthand witness told me.
So that would be
I
over on the
witnessed that.
side by the causeway, by the
It'd be like
lumber
from the
mill.
causeway past Dan Blankenship's
Okay.
house on that shoreline that really all the way over to the Ball Foundation.
Mhm.
And back at that time, it was very common for people like Samuel Ball or anybody else who lived on the island to be buried on the island. There was a lot of community graves. I can show you a grave between here and the village of New Ross, way back in the woods. Elizabeth Kritz, she's buried back in the woods. Got a lovely tombstone. And you're driving along this old logging road. Geez, all of a sudden there's a tombstone.
Wow.
But when you look into history, you'll find that there was a settlement there at one time. And she was a nurse who had left her settlement and gone to America to practice her craft, came back to take care of people who had diphtheria. She caught diphtheria and died.
Wow.
So Elizabeth Kritz. And she buried basically back in the woods. But it was
Wow.
a settlement at one time.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up here. And I was going to just say any last parting thought you would like to give us before we wrap this up? I know, big question, right?
Well,
Anything that we didn't touch on that you would like people to
gee
know?
whiz, no, look, there's a million things we could talk about, you
Yeah.
know, and I'll look at all the artifacts and the cases here and the photographs on the wall and all the neat things we have. There's a million things to talk about. So I would just encourage everybody, come to Chester, come to 20 Smith Road, find it where the Chester Municipal Heritage Society has their Oak Island display. And there's more here than just Oak Island too. There's other displays that you'll find of interest, like a gold mine display, for example. Foreman Hobbled, who was an inventor in the area. And we have a lovely gift shop. We have a really nice
I'm going to go
gift shop.
check that out in a few minutes.
go check
I
it out.
ran through it real quick just before we started, but I didn't get a chance to look around a little bit.
But
So
that comment doesn't cost you a penny. Come in through the door, and like I said, there's a donations box. So if you want to drop a couple of pennies into that, or a couple of dollars, I'd be happy, boy, because that's how I keep this thing in operation, through the donations. And over the years, people have been really, really generous.
Yeah.
And I thank
I tell you what.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really
Oh, my
appreciate this.
absolute
I like I said, when Carmen asked me if I wanted to meet you, well, he didn't tell me who. I was like, I'll meet anybody, and coming over here. And I know that Tom and Henry got the opportunity to come and see here
Yes.
and have you walk them around
Yes. That was
and
awesome.
tell stories, and they just loved it. And
And I got to tell you, Carmen, he's a hell of a nice guy.
He
I like
is.
Carmen Lake. He's a good man.
Yes, he is.
He has a lot of passions.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does.
And I tell you what, I couldn't say enough of good things about Carmen, because
Good guy.
he took us around and he introduced us to you and everything, and that was such a great thing, and I really appreciate that. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up here in Chester, and don't forget, tonight we are going to be talking with Ian and somebody. I don't know who else, over at the Oak Island Resort. That's going to be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. As long as I get all this equipment out of here and set up over there on time, we're going to do our very best. But yeah, shuffleboard. Yeah, he took a shuffleboarding. But anyway, thank you guys so much for being here with us today. And again, Danny, thank you so much for this.
Anytime.
I could do this all day with you.
Well, so could I. Unfortunately, that's a problem. You ask my poor suffering wife; she'll tell you I can talk for hours about Oak Island.
Oh man. Well, I would love, and you keep in touch with me. Now we have each other's phone numbers. Let's keep in touch, and you let me know when you're going to be giving tours again at Oak Island. I will be there.
Okay.
All right.
I'll have you right at the front of the line.
Thank you. I can't wait. Let's go. Again, thanks folks for being here with us tonight. Don't forget to
So long,
stay tuned tonight. We'll catch you next time right here on the Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream. Goodbye, everyone.